Hello. Uh-oh, that does sound right. Let me put my hat on.
Let me welcome you all here today to the Milk Row Cemetery in Somerville, Massachusetts. We're delighted that the weather is beautiful. This is not always the case when we come out and do our historic events. For those of you that have joined us on January 1st each year, you know what I mean. So this seems like a nice welcome change. Also, I want to make sure that you don't feel anytime during the ceremony you'd like to take advantage of some of our British refreshments. Please do. There's a lot. The chocolate will melt, so we don't want to take it back. So today I have the distinct pleasure and honor to have many British members of the community here today. And we have a little bit of a program that's over there that'll explain each one of them as they come on. I'm also delighted to say that I have the honor to have the mayor of Somerville here today. Tatiana Ballantyne has just started her service in the city as of January as the mayor, but she has been here for many years before that on the city council and as president at several times. So she's well familiar with the city. So thank you so much, Mayor, and please proceed.
Yeah, thank you. So nice to see everybody. Thank you for joining us here today. And special thanks to our veterans and service members. Thank you to the Historic Preservation Commission for helping to organize this commemoration and the many events to come as we begin Historic Preservation Month. I'd also like to thank the British representatives here today for your support and investment in Milk Row Cemetery. Philip Ford, of the British Officers Club of New England, Paolo De Fabio, representing the British Consulate General, James Normington of the British Commonwealth Remembrance Project. Here in Somerville, we take pride in having played such a significant role in the beginnings of the American Revolution and American democracy. This cemetery is a treasured historic resource in our community, and the markers here tell a story. Each is a window into the life lived and the life lost, and they connect us to our legacy and this nation's history. Unknown soldiers represent missing and unknown service members who made the ultimate sacrifice. This ceremony provides an opportunity to remember and honor unknown soldiers everywhere, whether lost on the battle road, in other conflicts throughout history, or sadly, even today in our present moment. When we come together, we create a space for reflection, learning, and for healing. So I'm honored and grateful to be with you today. Thank you again for inviting me to share in this commemoration. Thank you.
I would also like to acknowledge the presence, which we're really delighted of a former mayor, which is Dorothy Kelly Gay. It's particularly apropos that Dorothy is here, if I might say, because she is actually from Ireland, part of the Commonwealth.
Was a British citizen.
Oh, excuse me?
Married to a British citizen.
Married to a British citizen, this is true. And so she has been very instrumental, I have to say, in helping us celebrate historic events when she was the mayor here as well. In fact, she got me started on some of these things, some of these traditions. So it's delightful to have you here today.
Thank you, Brenda.
Mm-hmm. So we have a number of people here today also that I'd like to recognize that are in what I would call colonial garb, back to the times, and that in many cases are our docents. So for those of you that don't know anything about this cemetery, have never been here before, but would like to learn more, we have a docent program in the city, and we have docents that serve as guides to take you around and talk to you about what is here. And it's actually a wonderful museum almost of people and historic events and of stories that can be told through these tombstones here. So I hope you'll take advantage of that and come back. There's schedules over here as well as a brochure. I'd also like to introduce somebody else who has been instrumental in fixing up and restoring so much of the cemetery here today, which is Barbara Mangum. Barbara Mangum has many roles to play in the city, but among them, she is also an object conservator, and so she has been responsible for firsthand fixing, restoring many of the grave markers here. So beware, she's very personal about these. And it's taken a lot of work, as well as a Civil War monument that I want to draw your attention to because it's a very significant monument. It's actually the first one in United States of America that we know of that was erected in 1863 and financed by the civilians or the citizens of the city at the time, of the town, I should say, which is 1863, we were a town still in 1842. We became a city in 1872. So 1863, we were still a town. And the citizens cared so much about the soldiers that had been going to be lost, as it turns out, or a part of the Civil War, that they erected this monument, which we have lovingly restored with Barbara's help very recently, in fact, to the Community Preservation Act. So I would now like to acknowledge some of the people that are here from the British community, as the mayor has just acknowledged as well, and just tell you a little bit about them. And Paolo De Fabio, are you going to? Okay, thank you. I don't know that many people saw his hand go up, so he's going to raise it a little hard. Because he has been the head of politics, press, and public affairs for the British Consulate General in Boston since 2017. And in this role, he directs communication strategy, political engagement, and public outreach for the consulate team, serving as a spokesman on behalf of the Consulate General and helping to raise the UK's profile in the region, hence here today. Prior to joining the consulate, his career spanned many fields, working in both regional politics as well as higher education. He has managed campaigns, led communication teams and strategies, advised startups, and was a university recruiter and administrator for over a decade. He is a graduate of both Ithaca College and Boston University. And perhaps, most significantly to us today, he is a lifelong Somerville resident. And he is also the parent of 2 daughters who he is proudly raising in the same Somerville neighborhood in which he grew up. And maybe he's going to share with us what neighborhood that is, because he wasn't answering any of my emails. Oh, see? Yeah. I'm sure he got many history lessons when he was living here in the local history classes. So wonderful to have you here today. Thank you. Another one that's representing the British Officers Club of New England is Philip Ford. Okay, now there you go. There, man. Thank you. And he is the General Secretary of the British Officers Club of New England. He served for many years with the British Army, serving in multiple roles. And since he's retired from the British Army, he has decided to, seek greener pastures, and he's relocated to Waltham, Massachusetts, where he lives with his wife. He has a keen passion for history, and as such, he is the General Secretary for the club, and he is pleased to be responsible for organizing the club's monthly lectures on a variety of historical and military projects, of which I think this is probably one of them. No? And last, but hardly least, is James Normington. Thank you, Norm. And he is the founder and chairperson of the British Commonwealth Remembrance Project. And that project is a Massachusetts-based nonprofit entity which aims to educate the public about the sacrifice of British and Commonwealth soldiers, sailors, and airmen who are buried in New England. Currently, there are 250 graves that are known to exist from the period of the Revolutionary War through the Second World War. With the most of those graves, 220 of the 250 are stemming from the World War I and World War II. The Remembrance Project benefits from 300 volunteers, I'm very envious, who tend to these graves, performing an annual act of remembrance at each grave at every Armistice Day, which of course is November 11th. And another mission of the organization is to provide permanent memorials where none have been provided, and to maintain the graves that are found in a state of disrepair or neglect. It's a nonprofit organization that relies solely upon donations. The grave marker that is being donated today is one of two that they are supporting this year, and the first marker that is being located in Massachusetts this year. The other marker is going to Portland, Portland, Maine, excuse me, and that's for a World War II sailor, or World War I sailor, excuse me. So we are very pleased and very proud and very honored, I think, on behalf of the city, to have you all here today, being generous in their donation and finally doing something that should have been done many decades ago. So thank you. So in case you're all wondering about the Battle Road and you don't remember your history lessons from a few years back, we thought we would have somebody give you some tips or some reminders, if you will. So I'm going to give a historical background to Master Sergeant Arthur Conrad, who is, right behind me, okay. He is retired from the National Guard, and he actually lives in Lexington and gives tours there, I understand, on a trolley bus, but
Lexington Liberty Ride.
Lexington Liberty?
Right.
Okay.
Lexington Liberty Ride on a
Oh,
trolley
I see.
for Lexington and Concord.
I see, okay. So it's very appropriate that he's here today, and we're delighted to have his company. Thank you.
Well, greetings, everybody, and this is my first time I've been on this particular site, and Larry insisted that I come and talk about the stuff that we do on the Liberty Ride. This is the return to Boston that happened, and of course that turned on when I started to talk. Obviously, they don't like it already.
It's that Lexington background that does you, man.
Yeah. By the way, I'm also a member of the Ancient and Honorable Artillery Company, by the way. I've been with them for about 25 years next year. They took me in to take William Dawes' place after he passed away. I know people say I look that old, too. Actually, I have the job that William Dawes used to do in the company way back when. Anyway, a couple things about April 19th that a lot of folks don't know. As far as the Redcoats' mission was to go to Concord and find these military supplies that are stored there and to destroy all of these supplies that the colonials had. Well, that's what they were supposed to do, so they started to they were going to make their way out here, but come to find out, first of all, you should know that April 19th, 1775 was a Wednesday. And for years in Massachusetts, many barber shops have been closed on Wednesdays. And that's because the Boston barber was on the side of the Redcoats and agreed to lead them to Concord so they didn't get lost taking their march up to Concord. Just a little information for you that most people don't realize, and if you're on Family Feud, it might be helpful. Anyway, the Redcoats marched along up to Concord along the Battle Road. It was from Concord to Boston is 18 miles. Of course, they were rowed across the Charles River, which was up by the Boston Common in those days, and then they had to march from East Cambridge all the way to Concord. So it was quite a job for them to make that move up there. They finally got in trouble at the Lexington Battle Green, which is the birthplace of American liberty, where the first shot of the Revolution was fired. The more about that in the Liberty Ride, anytime you want to go, just bring it up on your computer and you can find out where it is and how it works out. It's a pretty interesting trip. At any rate, the Redcoats finally made their way and they got up into Concord. And they were quite tired at the time. When they got into Concord, they went into a inn that was right close to them and to have breakfast. The senior officers did that, but the rest of the troops didn't do that. Then they continued on because they had to still find out where these supplies were located and where they were. And finally they found that out, and they made their way down Monument Street to go across the North Bridge. Once we found out that they were coming, the alarm went out throughout all of the local colonies around Bedford and Concord and not Lexington, but Carlisle and Maynard and Sudbury, and all of these various other militias were reporting to Concord because there was a real problem going on here. At any rate, as the time went on, the colonials, the redcoats wanted the troops out of there. They wanted to get across the bridge because that's how they had to get to where they think these supplies are located. Well, they started to go across the bridge, and Major John Buttrick of the Concord Colonials brought the Colonials down to the bridge and met up there, and then we had a conflict that occurred there. There were 3 redcoats were killed in that particular event that happened there. The 3 of them are entombed beside a statue that's just before the Concord Bridge. And every year on the 19th of April or the 18th, depending on whatever day we're celebrating it on, Queen Elizabeth used to come here every year, and they did a big event there each year. Finally, she's not able to do that anymore, and so somebody asked one of the people, they wanted to know if Meghan Markle was coming over this year. Which somebody actually asked that question. I couldn't believe that. They had a higher up in the Queen's staff was here this year, and the event went on. So when all was said and done, there was a 4th redcoat that was killed that, believe it or not, is buried on the sidewalk across from the Colonial Inn in Concord, and there's a British flag that's right there on the side of the sidewalk, and it just seems an odd place to have a burial, but that's where one is. And he was one that was wounded that day and managed to get to the center of town and passed away there. So anyway, it's time for the British decided it's time to go back. Their exercise was futile because they didn't get a hold of much of anything that was available to be passed away, because most of it had all been moved away to another town nearby. The redcoats also wanted to capture John Hancock and Sam Adams. They also had that on their mind at the time, and they were staying overnight at the Hancock Clark House in Lexington, which is really the site where the pastor of Lexington resided. And so they were staying overnight there because they were conducting meetings of the Provincial Congress in the town of Concord. So that was their motel room, if you will. So kind of interesting about that. They wanted to make sure that Paul Revere wanted to be sure that the redcoats got nowhere near that building and found Hancock and Sam Adams. Oh, and by the way, Sam Adams did not have any beer in those days in that house over there. I always tell that on the trolley because people will ask that question. At any rate, so the battle ensued on the Lexington Battle Green. Finally, when the troops were coming, Captain Parker said to his Lexington militia that was on the green, "Stand your ground, don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have a war, then let it begin here." Well, it did begin right there. Finally, Major Pitcairn, in charge of the redcoats that were there that morning, he wanted all of the troops to be dismissed, told Parker to dismiss the troops, and he did, and they started to walk off the field. Now, the problem with that is that there was a shot that rang out, and to this day, we don't know who fired the shot. However, to go into a pub, Buckman Tavern, the second floor was the headquarters of the Lexington Militia. If you go into a tavern, you got your weapon with you, you've got to clear the weapon before you go inside the tavern. Only way to clear it is to pull that trigger, and off will take care of that. So we don't know who fired the shot, but at any rate, as the colonials were going across the green to report back to the tavern, the redcoats started firing at them. Many colonials had put their weapons on the ground, and they were shooting a lot of the people in the backs that were killed. There were 8 dead that morning on the Lexington Green colonials, 10 wounded. Anyway, after that was done, redcoats chanted their hip hip huzzah cheer that they usually do, and they formed up and they started to make their way on up to Concord. They still got at least 12 miles to go yet anyway, and a lot of it's uphill. So off they went. Captain Parker decides that day he's going to get whatever troops he's got left from Lexington, and he's going to send them to a special site on the Lexington-Lincoln line. More about that in a few moments. Anyway, the Redcoats finally get up to Concord, and they've already found out that they couldn't find the supplies to get rid of and whatnot, so they decide they're going to start heading back to Boston. Finally, they leave Concord and they head out of Concord on their way to Boston. Now, they always march along basically in a two-column formation, shoulder to shoulder, and they'd march along. They get down the road about a mile and a half. There's a place called Miriam's Corner right there in Concord, right by Old Bedford Road. And that was the first ambush that, according to the history, that the Redcoats ever ran into was there at Miriam's Corner that day. The Colonials were there all set up, and that was the first time they ran into an ambush. Well, finally, they reformed and started to keep moving down the road, and I always wonder why they didn't change the way they did their march, but they continued on the same thing. And they get along the road, and next thing you know, there's another ambush that comes up. Not as big as the one at Miriam Corner, but you still had people there. And then you keep going farther along, and a couple more ambushes. And along the road, they finally come down to a site that's known today as Parker's Revenge. Captain Parker wanted to get revenge for what happened on the Lexington Battle Green that morning and set up this huge ambush site on this lot that I talked about on the Lexington-Lincoln line, actually in Lexington at the time. And they came through there, and there was a lot of lives lost in that particular site. The Colonials then backed off of there, and the Redcoats kept on going back to where they were supposed to be headed to, going back towards Boston. So that's how the side went. When they went through Lexington, the next town in those days was known as Menotomy. Today it's called Arlington and has been for years, but in those days it was Menotomy. I know the Redcoats stopped in the Jason Russell house down there, and there was a lot of Colonials sitting at the bar and whatnot. I know you find that hard to believe in a tavern in Menotomy, but anyway, some Redcoats went in there and they started shooting, and there were a lot of lost lives in that particular issue there. So that's basically what happened, and they made their way back to Boston, and that's how the situation went on the return. Of course, all the Colonials were able to go back to their original towns and or cities that they came from, and they went back and started up business again as usual. Okay.
That was wonderful. Thank you very much. And I must say, I don't think I ever heard all of that whole story when I was in school, so it's great. So I would now like to have the pleasure to introduce, as I mentioned before, my colleague in organizing this event today. He is also a lifelong Somerville resident, although he escaped for a little bit, I think, and came back because he realized he missed it. So he is here today when playing a couple of different roles. I think the one that he was playing before is he's a colonel in the Ancient and Honorable Artillery Company. But now I believe that he's going to talk about, from the point of view of Lawrence Walford, who he'll explain was a citizen here in Somerville. And he's going to tell you about the retreat and answer one of those questions. So please come forth, Lawrence Wilworth.
Thank you, Brandon, for the invitation. I just wanted to say that I'm a docent and actually invite anybody to the Powder House, and more importantly, every Veterans Day we will have a remembrance ceremony for the British soldier and all others. 247 years ago, on Wednesday, April 19th, 1775, the British Army's 18-mile retreat from Concord back to Boston was under continual hostile fire by up to 4,000 militia of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The original contingent of 800 grenadiers and light infantry retreating from Concord were reinforced by an additional 900 soldiers and 2 cannon from Boston at the Lexington. Unfortunately, they suffered 273 casualties of the 1,700 involved, including 73 killed in action, 174 wounded in action, and 26 missing. As you were described, there are 10 markers marking these grave sites from Concord Bridge to Somerville, displaying the British 1606, which a British citizen has been putting, one of which we show right here on the grave site, from marking the location where unknown British soldiers fell and were buried along the retreat route now known as Battle Road. Milk Row, which became Somerville Avenue, is Battle Road. The British marched up this road and they marched back down it. Of the 26 missing in action on that date, one is buried here in Milk Row Cemetery. We know of 4 unknown soldiers killed in action on that date that are buried in Charlestown beyond the Neck. Remember, this was Charlestown in 1775, now called Somerville. 3 are buried on the sidewalk, under the sidewalk at Beach Street and Elmwood Street, marked by a monument, next to a bike shop, by the way. That's in Somerville, right on Beach Street and Elm Street. In the late 1840s, after Somerville became an independent town, the remains of an unknown British soldier were discovered but on the Rand property near Central Street and Milk Row. Osgood Dane, a local resident, collected the remains in a wooden shoebox, as it's reported, and had it reinterred near this marker next to the tomb in the back of Milk Row Cemetery. It was reported the remains found were identified as a British grenadier by regimental buttons and the remains of white leather. Now, some people may not, but another distinction, being a British grenadier, they would have been at the back of the column and would most likely be the ones that were shot at. And as grenadiers duty positions with the rear of a British retreating column, they would be exposed to increasing danger and not noticed if they were missing. Remembrance. On Remembrance Day each year, November 11th, Great Britain and its Commonwealth nations acknowledge and honor the service and casualties of all wars since World War I. We acknowledge the graves of all unknown soldiers with the presentation of a red poppy leaf at the gravesite of this unknown British soldier killed on Battle Road on 19 April 1775. We now are going to hear from, what's his name? The British Commonwealth group who wants to say a few words.
Hello, I'm James Normington, and I'm going to read the Act of Remembrance, which is said every year and at every graveside where British and Commonwealth troops have fallen here in New England. And it starts thus. When you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow we gave our today. They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. Thank you.
Thank you. Lieutenant Collins, take charge of the honor guard for the final ceremony.
Lord,
Present the wreath. Present the poppy wreath.
Honor guard. Order. Arms.
Present. Arms. Shoulder. Arms.
We will now have 2 minutes of silence as in British traditions. This concludes today's observance. I wish to thank His Majesty's 10th Regiment of Foot and members of the Ancient and Honorable Artillery Company supporting this ceremony. And thank you all for participation. Commander of Troops, dismiss the Honor Guard.
Honor guard. Dismissed.